What is going on, world? Welcome back to Aquatic. Today is going to be a video that's going to be important to every fish keeper, from a novice to an experienced fish keeper. I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible, and in this video we're going to be covering the importance of pH in fish keeping. So this is not just for plecos and cichlids and angelfish and discus and stuff, and tetras and African cichlids. pH matters for all living things. Now the first thing we're going to look at is what pH is and why it's important. And but the bottom line of the video is, if you are going to keep fish, the best thing to do is keep fish that are going to live in your own water. So for example, if you have water that has 8.0, 8.5 pH, the best thing to do is keep African Rift Lake cichlids that live. There's so many amazing fish that you can keep, and that I do not keep in my fish room, that I want to keep, but then I would have to add pH buffers or coral sand or crushed corals. It's just another thing. And when I have a larger fish room, I will be keeping some of these fish here, so we'll be looking at those in the future. So subscribe and stay tuned for those things upcoming. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to be looking at what the importance of pH is, and then how this matters to organic things, and why it is important in fish keeping and for our fish. And also at the end, we'll be looking at things you can do to alter your pH. So if you want to keep certain types of fish that are not the type of fish you have in you can keep in your own water, you can actually do these things to alter your water, so that you can keep some of the fish that do not live in the same water as you have out of your faucet or tap.
Produced by Mali.
Now the first thing I'm going to say is, water is weird, okay? Water acts crazy weird when it comes down to it, and that's what makes organic chemistry possible. We are organic things and living beings, and we are all possible because of the weirdness of water, and because of what water does and how it bonds. And this is all related to it, and I think that's quite important. So I'm going to make that the first thing I'm going to say about this. So pH correlates to biology. Everything living depends on specific pHs to function. Even for us, for example, our urine, our piss is pH of around 6, and our blood is between 7.3 and 7.4 pH, depending on how healthy you are as a person, and various other factors. Our stomach acids, for example, are at about a pH of 2. We'll be looking at that in a little bit when we're looking at how different acids work and stuff. So it'll be like about a grade 12 level science course. That's the education I have. I have grade 12 organic chemistry education, and after that I didn't study chemistry or anything like that. I was really good at it. I just went on a different field. But I made some slides for you guys, so we'll be looking at these. And so this is the first slide. I mean, it's hand drawn. I'll put some close-ups and stuff so you guys can see this more clearly. But basically, pH correlates to biology, and basically water acts really weird. So these are the two things you have to remember for this part. And so the first thing we're going to look at is how an oxygen, like a water molecule, acts. So the water molecule has an oxygen molecule and 2 hydrogen molecules, okay? And so basically water acts really weird. So the part of the side where there's no hydrogen, because there's still like more here, and that part is a negative charge, and the 2 hydrogen particles, so that side is a bit more positively charged, okay? So if another water molecule was to come into contact with it, this does not attach to these two negative polars, does not attach to these 2 positive polars. How it works is, it would attach one of the negatives into one of the positives, and another one will attach to right here, okay? So like, that's why water becomes fluid, and then it's a liquid form, and all these things. All of these matter based on this particular connection water has, okay? Like I said here, water is weird, okay? It's really weird. That's what makes all of us possible. So this is really important in terms of life in general, okay? Not just like for fish, but in terms of, if you're keeping any other living things, for farming, for example, if you want to grow potatoes, you want to have a soil pH of about 5. If the soil pH is above 5.5, then the potato plant has a hard time absorbing specific nutrients. and then it does not grow well and you do not have a large harvest. If you watch some of my videos from last summer where I was growing like those huge yields in my rooftop garden, those were all possible because I understand the simple concept of water and soil pH, and I was adding specific amounts of acid to all my different plants, or the water that I was planting them, watering them with, so that the soil pH changed to the ideal pH for that plant, and that's how I got those huge potato harvests, huge carrot harvests, all based on soil pH and specific organic nutrients that you add to the soil. So we'll look at those in other videos. If you guys are interested, comment below and let me know. But for the purpose of this video, it also matters because pH is important for organic chemistry. Now, what happens in water and why water is weird is because water does something weird right here. So now in a pH of 7, for example, this is actually very rare to happen. This happens in 1 in 10 million in a pH of 7. And you will understand why that is in a minute. But for the purpose of this part, water molecule, okay, so this is a hydronium molecule which has stolen a hydrogen molecule out of one of this other water molecules. So right here now you have a hydroxide and a hydronium, okay. This is the same as H plus. For this purpose of science they usually call it H plus, but in reality it's a hydronium, and this is very rare. So if the water pH was 7, if the water was neutral, so if when the water pH is 7, this happens 1 out of 10 million water molecules. So 1 water molecule out of 10 million will be one of these, and then also that means one of these would exist, okay, a hydroxide which doesn't have a hydrogen, so then it would be 7, okay, and these two are interchangeable at this point, okay, so you have the same amount of hydronium as hydroxide, okay. So moving on to the next slide here, that means, okay, the pH equals minus log to the H plus, which is the hydronium or hydrogen plus, okay. Now this part is like just basic chemistry and math, so basically you don't have to worry too much about it, but basically this is how you get to it. So minus log times 1 in 10 million, which is 1 in 10 million written out. So minus log times 1 times 10 to the minus 7, which is 10 million, okay? And pH equals 7. So this gives you a number of 7. Basically, whatever this number is up here, which is the minus 7, or how many ever zeros are in this equation, is the actual pH. Now, what does that mean? That means every time this number changes by 1 amount, so if this becomes 6, this is only 1 in 1 million, okay? If this was 8, it would become 1 in 100 million, okay? So it would be 1 times 10 to the power of minus 8, okay? So this is how this whole scale is made. So when you say a pH of 7, it just means there's 1 in 10 million chance of a hydronium being there. And if it's a pH of 8, there's a chance of 1 in 100 million, okay? So it increases by a factor of 10 every time this changes by a factor of 1, okay? So that's how this math works. Now, for the purpose of this video, we're going to be looking at just basic acids that you can find anywhere. Hydrochloric acid, which is our stomach acid, which is when you mix that with, for example, a little bit of water, you have hydrogen and chloride, okay? So hydrogen ions and chloride ions. This is actually supposed to be a minus. I actually put a positive by there by accident. But in that case, the pH would be 1 in 100, which would give you a log scale of 1 to 10 to the minus power of 2, or 1 times 10 to the minus power of 2, which is a pH of 2. So hydrochloric acid in this example has a pH of 2, okay? Now moving on, we're going to look at a base, okay? So this is sodium hydroxide, which is a hard, heavy base, and when you mix that with water, for example, you have sodium, which is the positive, and the hydroxide, which is the negative, and these two now are floating in the water, and this gives you a pH of log 1 times 10 to the minus 12. Okay, so there's 12 zeros in this equation, so that's how you get a pH of 12. Okay, pH measures the hydrogen plus or the hydronium. Okay, so H plus or OH 3 plus. Okay, and basically that gives you these numbers. So the rarity of the OH3 plus is what that means. 1 in, I think, 1 trillion would be an OH plus at this level. Okay, so don't quote me for that last math because I just thought of it in my head. But basically, this gives us our pH scale. Okay, so after looking at all this stuff, which is a little bit of a headache, we come to this thing, which is basically why we have this pH scale. There's 1 to 14. Okay, so 7 is where you think neutral, and most people say that you can keep most fish at a pH of 7. This is relatively yes and no type of answer, because depending on where the animal comes from, for example, wild caught fish might not be ideally doing good at this pH if you didn't acclimatize them well. Now I do have some green neon tetras that come from a pH of about 3 to 4. Okay, I do have them at now about pH between 6 and 7, sometimes a little bit higher than 7 when I do a water change, and they're doing fine in my setup. But initially when I got them, they were not, so I had to keep them at a pH of 5 and gradually increase the pH to 6 and then to 7, and then move them into the tanks where my tap water, and now they are doing great. Out of 1,000, I have maybe several hundred that are a-okay. Okay, so that's the reason why this becomes important. Now another reason why this is important is based on where the animal lives, its eggs also might require a specific pH or below a specific pH to hatch and to develop properly. So this is something to also pay attention to, and this all boils down to organic chemistry, right? So for the purpose of this video though, acids are above 7 and bases are below 7. Now if you put some soap into your tank, your fish will die. If your child accidentally threw some bleach into the tank, your fish would die. The reason for that is those things are hard bases. Okay, the same thing would apply if you were to throw some acid into your tank accidentally, or some HCl or like battery acid or something like that. Like your fish could die from that because you are now changing this drastically, right? When it comes down to fish, certain types of fish come from certain types of water. South American fish come from neutral to acidic waters, and if you are going to keep South American fish like plecos and stuff, for example, and you are trying to breed these animals, you really want to keep them in neutral to acidic, slightly acidic water for optimal success. And this applies to also discus and angelfish. You have very higher success rates when the pH is below 7 or close to 7 and slightly below, because the eggs hatch much better. When people ask me how I get the large hatch rates, it's because my pH is neutral or lower, and this is just what it is. And people always assume that it's some type of skill or anything. No, it's basically organic chemistry 101. Animals come from a specific pH, has to be kept in those pHs for the optimal health of the animal. And if you are not doing that, then you're basically trying to keep saltwater fish in fresh water, and that just doesn't work long term. Some animals can acclimatize well to living in different pHs, and we are a testament to that, because people do keep a lot of these animals even in a pH of 8. But when you're talking a pH of 8, you're looking at keeping an animal that comes from, let's say, a pH of 6 at a pH of 8. That's 100 times more basic than the actual environment that the animal comes from. So if you are going to keep that in such a basic environment right away, that animal's not going to do so well. And even if you acclimatize them over a long period of time, to spawn this animal might not work so well, because its egg development might hinder based on the actual chemistry of the water. You know what I mean? So these all correlates to organic chemistry, basically, unfortunately, and this is just how things work. Now if you do really want to do this, the next option is like keeping a marine fish. If I were to keep marine fish, I have kept marine aquariums, I have done what everybody else does. You get an RO unit and you make RO water, and you put salt in it. You buy whatever brand salt from the pet store or Amazon or whatever it is, and you mix it up, and you do your water changes with that, and then every 2-3 weeks you have to make a new bucket of salt water, or how many buckets you need, and you fill up your tank after you do your water change, and any other water that evaporates, you top it up every few days, you know. And this is basically how anybody that doesn't live beside the ocean keeps a saltwater aquarium. The same thing applies to if you do have really hard water and you want to keep some of these South American soft water animals. I mean, especially some of the rarer tetras, some of the, you know, specific Corridora species, some of the specific types of like wild angelfish, for example, or some of the apistogrammas, even some of the plecos, which are a little bit more adaptable to higher pH for living purposes, but for breeding purposes, not necessarily. You do have to, you know, figure out a way to alter your pH. And I think the best way to do this is having RO water. And another really good way is using soils, like activated soils, like ADA Aquasoil is a good brand. I use Tropica Aquasolum or whatever it's called, or, you know, whatever planted soil. And it really works for me, and you know, I will use it on some specific tanks, like the tank that I put incoming new fish from South America that require really low pH. I have Tropica Aquasoil. It brings my pH to about 5.5. You know, I also use oak leaves to, you know, help with the KH and pH. So in my pleco tanks, for example, you'll see a bunch of oak leaves floating around, and that's to help with that. And so that I do that as well. And the active soil, I believe, helps buffer the pH, and it stops pH crashes. So unless you really have a better understanding of what you're doing and you're monitoring your water regularly, I would recommend using something like a soil, like active soil. And the only downside to using active soil, I believe, is that it depletes over time. So you really would have to replace it. So I mean, using them in filter bags and stuff like that is good. I've done that before, using them in little planters. You know, you put the little box of soil into your tank. You know, every 3 months you take it out, throw it out, and put new one in, you know, whatever. So that's an option. But RO is a good option, but in conjunction with remineralizing, as well as something like aqua soil or a large snail population. And also don't put too much RO in at once, you know, small amounts. You know, and then you know, put small amounts of pure RO, see how the pH is altered by it, and over time check every day, you know, things like that. And that's basically what you can do. And basically the fish we like to keep, at least the fish that I have in my fish room right now, need to be in a pH of 7 or below. Slightly higher than 7 is okay, but a lot more higher when it comes to 7.5, 8, they're not going to do too well. And same thing applies on the bottom end. So when you're passing 5 and stuff, a lot of these animals will start close to 4. A lot of them will start melting. I've had that happen with Corridoras in the past. I've had discus melt at 4 pH, but angelfish seem to do fine. I've had angelfish 4.0, no problem. But I wouldn't do that with captive born animals, just you know, wild collected fish and stuff. So it all depends on the species. For example, I have Pygmaeus corridoras that spawn at 4.0 pH, and I've had a really hard time bringing them up to my pH, because 4.0 pH is 1,000 times more acidic. So there is you know, 1 in 10,000 of the water molecules is a hydronium, whereas here it's 1 in 10 million. Okay, so that's a huge difference, right? And that's why that's important. So a pH of 4, there's 1 in out of every 10,000 water molecules is a hydronium, or H plus, you know, whereas here 1 out of every 10 million is a hydronium. So that's why this becomes really important. So yeah, if you are keeping reef flake cichlids, you would want to keep them at about 8.5 pH. Salt water is between 8 and 9, usually close to 8, but you know, if you are mixing your own, it usually you add a little bit more calcium carbonate, and there's other stuff in there, so the pH is usually about 8.8, 8.5, somewhere there. And that's salt water. And there are animals that can live in pHs of 9, but they do not exist in the aquarium hobby. There's also animals that can live in pHs below 4, very rarely found in the aquarium hobby. Green neon tetras is an exception, and they do live between pH of 3 and 4 in the nature. So that's really acidic. So this things to consider, and this is basically the bottom line of the video. And if you are going to keep animals, the best thing to do, unless you want to go through all this hassle of learning all of this stuff, is to keep animals that live in the water that you can get out of your tap. You know, there's so many different species of animals, fish, and there's so many amazing types of fish that you can keep. You don't have to keep the same type of fish that I keep. You don't have to keep the same type of fish somebody else keeps. When I go to one of my friends' houses that has South African or Rift Lake cichlids, I go goo goo gaga berserk, you know, just like how you might watch my videos and say, oh my god, this guy has an amazing pleco collection. I look at some of the really rare cichlids they have, some Africans, and I go goo goo gaga and say, this guy has the best African cichlid collection. And there's some really spectacular fish. So if you have really hard water, that's a really good option. And when I have more financial stability and a larger facility, I also want to keep a lot of African cichlids. So we'll be looking at those in the future, and also different types of fish I want to keep in the future. And so stay tuned for that and subscribe if you haven't. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Thank you so much. I love you all. God bless you. Hey. Fringy, you a happy dog? Yes, you are. Aren't you? Look at that smile. Are you smiling? Yeah, look at that smile. Yeah, baby. Okay, come on. Off the road. Off the road. Back on the sidewalk, please. Thank you. Good job.